on YouTube.
That is the hidden sixth version, or sixth thing, which is probably a good place to start as any. So, Eric, I'm gonna let you kind of take over this first part while I get settled in. Um, just to kind of reiterate, and of course, for those of you who haven't had Eric as a trainer, um, Eric and Brad are essentially our two trainers at Spitz, and so the it's I'm really happy to have Eric as my co-host today. I got to tell you that. So while I get a few last minute things done, Eric, if we want to go over the 5 basic functions, I think that'll set us up good for the rest of the day.
Yep. I think over sort of years of distillation, you can sort of break down the 5 basic functions that we use Starry Night for into 6 or 7 words. And then you just need to know what those words mean, basically. First is where, i.e., what kind of observing location are you going to choose to look out upon the universe? Second is when, because you have a great deal of control over displaying the sky as it's visible at some particular date in the past or the future. And you can control how fast time is flowing. In fact, you can even run it backwards. So where, when, how fast. Number 4 is what. And what is basically you are looking at. There are a great number of databases in Starry Night, and we want to sort of narrow things down so that only one is highlighted at a time, or perhaps 2 to contrast, rather than having, several different grid systems and several different kinds of labels up at the same time. So in that case, it's kind of more important what you're not looking at rather than what you are. The 5th thing that's important is also important for filtering out sort of data that doesn't make any sense. You want to look at the sky with the proper orientation. So if you're looking at something in the alt-azimuth orientation system, if you're looking at Saturn, Saturn will rise with the rings tilted to one side, mirror like. And then Saturn will end up like this when it transits the meridian. And then when Saturn sets, it will be tilted like this. And that's not the best way to observe Saturn. We want to look at it with some kind of orientation where the rings are not going to be wobbling from side to side. So 5 basic functions of Starry Night are where, when, how fast, what, and how. And this is what the folks in the other basic lessons will be starting right now as well. We've probably gone over, you've probably gone over that at a past institute, or it's possible that you've had some experience with using Starry Night as a desktop application completely apart from Starry Night. If you've had some kind of experience with Starry Night, or maybe even if you haven't used Starry Night, maybe you've used Solarium or Sky Safari, and Sky Safari is a nice application. Definitely worth checking out on your phone. There are other ways of thinking about things in Starry Night, and just to touch briefly on the things that we are not going to be discussing in depth, we might actually discuss lists, because I think we've sort of learned from some of you guys that there are other ways of perceiving Starry Night. The observing lists in Starry Night are a simple feature that just turns on the labels for things. And it doesn't specify anything about where you're observing them from, or what time it is, or whether they're even above the horizon. So the 5 basic functions pretty much get tossed when you use those observing lists. But if, as a canny planetarium person, you are using an observing list to look at summer sky constellations, and you have an observing list that does just them, and you already know that you're observing from a location where you can see all that stuff, then that would be a good observing list. And
okay, all right, we're ready to go. So now that we're all set and ready, what we're going to do is I'm going to be predominantly sharing my screen, which is going to be almost entirely pre-flight. So all of you should be seeing Are you seeing my pre-flight? You should see my location is Philly. Okay, I'm seeing good heads. All right, perfect. So most of what we're going to do today is going to be in the pre-flight window, and then Eric and I are just going to kind of go back and forth between the two of us. But kind of having the basics of what we do, and sort of what we utilize the different parts of Starry Night for. Probably a good idea. We'll take the 3 minutes to kind of go over the setup that you have in front of you. Most of you are going to have four panes, four sort of option areas, minor favorites, options, planets, and constellations. Then, of course, you've got your pre-flight preview. There in the bottom right, you can change the size. If you kind of know what you're going to be doing, if it's a lot of constellation work, you might want to keep that smaller because you know what you're going to be viewing if you need some more space up top. And then, of course, we have um, our concurrent time, place, date, rate, all of the things we might want to change for our times and locations and field of view is going to be up on those very top two lines. So, of course, your top line is for render box. That's why you see the live button. And so, if at any point it seems like there's a disconnect between what you're seeing in Preview Suite's pre-flight and what you're seeing on your render box preview, live is the place to check. There's also, of course, a small refresh button that's right alongside it that will take anything that's on your pre-flight and transfer that to your dome view, or in this case, your preview window. Um, as long as you've got everything looking okay, then it goes a little bit more into how we would want to customize your pre-flight. So some of you may have a pre-flight configuration that you use in your dome that you might want to change so that here in Preview Suite it's a little bit more familiar. But one of the things to remember always is that those three parallel lines, what are lovingly referred to as the hamburger elsewhere, those are always going to be your friend. Wherever you find a hamburger, you are going to find an additional context menu. And that, of course, allows you to change options and delve deeper into the aspects of Starry Night. Kind of as a default, I use favorites frequently, but not as always the basis of my shows. That's just sort of that is a habit that has died hard for me. I do a lot of things manually. I'm getting better, as I should, and like ATM4 is your friend for those kind of things. But if I put my favorites there on the right side, you'll also notice that when you click on the hamburger, you could have four of these panels be exactly the same thing. Again, it's what you want available to you. So I might have my favorites there on the left. I may have my display options on the second panel. And that's where we're going to spend a fair amount of time over the next 2 days, is focusing on some of the options that delve a little bit deeper when we get into things like changing the stick figures or illustrations for constellations, or if we want to look at the sky surveys and have them act a certain way, we're going to be able to use this options menu to do so. Of course, one of the things you might remember from your time in your dome, of course, if you've had any sort of previous Starry Night, is that you do have a combination of drop down menus, which are, of course, the small triangles you see. So if I click the small triangle next to Alt as Guides, I can see the additional toggles that I have available, labels and horizon, the grids. But you'll also notice, of course, is that when you hover over some of these text, they do change colors. So there's not, let's see, there's like 20 of us. I'm not really concerned that you're all going to talk over each other, mainly because, and I'm not gonna say it's true until I see everybody. Okay, we don't have the kind of people in this room that will massively talk over each other. So, woo. The returners know exactly who we're talking about. So this is going to be a bit more because Eric and I are going to be going back and forth between the teaching. Feel free, especially for me, and Eric can give you an idea as well. I'm used to the formal education side where people interrupt you while you're teaching. So feel free to interrupt me if need be, either to slow down or to go over something. Or if you want to answer a question, the chat's kind of the way to go, so we can see sort of where everybody is on the continuum of their knowledge of Starry Night. So if we were to hover over something in the options menu and it changes color, what does that indicate for like what will happen if I click it?
Another menu comes up.
Exactly. Thanks, Karen. So another menu comes up. In this case, I clicked on Celestial Guides, and I see that my Celestial Guides window has popped up. Hopefully, you guys see that as well. And then now I have much more detailed information about how I want my equator and my circumpolar regions to look. I can set color. You can set thickness and axis. All of these very, very, very deep details that we're not going to worry about are available to you with that next click. So I'll put my display options there. Most everything we're going to want to look at is going to have a toggle somewhere in that menu. My third panel is usually planets. And that, of course,
I don't know why you've set it up like that, but
because
anyways,
I don't use Starball controls. It's just
you do
Starball
you.
controls are weird. But for me, planets, especially if you're going to be presenting a solar system tour or something, having everything in one place is very, very useful. You can, of course, see the Sun and Mercury, Venus. Usually, I'll keep inferior asteroids, near Earths, all those sorts of things closed, so that I'm primarily focusing on the planets themselves and the major moons. You'll notice, of course, that along the top line of this panel, you'll see some headers. So name. In this case, we've got a couple here. This is the orbit line. So it's probably not going to show up all that well here when we're clicking on it. But you have a area here for orbits. If you click on that, the orbit will pop up. There's altitude, which is pretty useful if you are, in fact, trying to tell somebody where an object is located. Now we're going to admit one more person. So you'll notice, of course, we're in the daytime sky, about 2 o'clock in the afternoon here in Philly, and the sun has an altitude of approximately 65 degrees. This is great if you want to, at a glance, know if something is in the sky. It's, of course, up to you. It's up to you whether or not you'd like to have this sort of information up here. A great idea is if you like the magnification bar, if you want to increase the size of an object, you can also drag that part of the window over a little bit, because of course with the longer magnification bar, you have a little bit more control over how precise that magnification is. So I think if I were to go to the middle on Venus, we would see an extremely diffuse crescent of Venus, which seems about right. If this was the nighttime sky, then we can increase the size of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars, and you'd see that increase as well. You have the constellation that it's currently in, or should you right click, an entire list of additional information that you may or may not want at your disposal. So if you are talking to an astronomy club and they want to know the magnitude of Jupiter, then you can add a magnitude column, and you'd be able to say that in our nighttime sky, Jupiter has a magnitude of about negative 2.7. So plenty bright. And you'll notice, of course, that if you look at the magnitudes for the 4 Galilean moons just below it, all of those are theoretically bright enough to be seen with the naked eye. It's just that it's extremely difficult to do because A, most people don't have that precise of an eyesight, and B, Jupiter's just way too bright. So a little fun fact: it is theoretically possible to see the Galilean moons with just your eyes. So you have an entire array of information that you can add, kind of set that up to your own needs. And if you don't like planets there, if you're maybe a bit more like Eric, or you have a more traditional setup, you might use starball controls, which is exactly what they sound like. These are going to be sliders that act precisely the way the old knobs would do on an optomechanical star projector. So, for a quick example, the easiest way to show this would be to move in daily motion. So, there I can see if I can reverse to the left, I can move forward in time to the right. I drag that a little bit to the side, and we might see a very, very tiny bit of daily motion. I keep moving that.
And if this was simply a mechanical system, a mechanical planetarium, it's just a gear ratio. You turn that gear, and everything on the planetarium will slowly move to the west or to the east. When Starry Night was being converted for use by Sidome, there wasn't a starball pane. What that gear ratio is actually doing. And time is not actually running at anything like an unusual rate. What we're doing here is we are moving around the, say, 39th parallel, 40th parallel.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and we're just changing our longitude.
Correct.
Time is not running. You can see the time is moving in steps of 1 hour as we move from one time zone to the next.
So it's meant to give you the look that you would get from a standard mechanical star projector, but it's not going to give you sort of the precision to say, oh, we're now in the nighttime and my location is someplace that is nowhere near home. So to get this sky, it would need to be 11:30 somewhere in Oroville of the United States. The same thing with your latitude, if you remember from the old optomechanical days. If you move things forward, as we increase our latitude north, the sun, of course, will get lower and lower in the sky. If we do the opposite, the sun will get higher and higher in the sky until we're south of the equator. So, whether or not you would like to use these is, of course, completely up to you. If you've never used an optical projector before, if this is completely foreign to you, forget they even existed, put the planets in their place, and never look back again. It's just another way of controlling motion that's available to you. And then for me, the last of the panels, I like to have the constellations open, primarily because if you're presenting a star show and maybe you want a single constellation to show up, I might be able to just click on that and say, all right, Cassiopeia. I'll just click on that. And then if this was dark enough, you would see the outline of Cassiopeia's star pattern and the name across there. So it's kind of an easy, very straightforward way of gaining that information. But again, this is the same thing as if you were in your car or your desktop or your phone. How you set it up is almost always uniquely going to be your own. So make sure to set it up in the way you feel comfortable, size the things the way that you'd want to, so that you can have what you use most often up front and center.
Well, getting ready for this event, we drilled each other pretty um, strictly that we do not want to use this opportunity to show you all of the different ways that you can turn something on or off in Starry Night, because generally there are at least three ways of doing a thing in Starry Night. There's probably a mouse click that you can use to get it on. There's probably a keystroke that you can use to turn it on or off. And what was the third thing?
You can yell at it. It
Yeah.
doesn't work, but it's usually a third way.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And we are going to tell you that that is a thing that you can do. There is an appendix in the back of the Starry Night manual document that you can access via the help menu, and you can look up the various key assignments there. I say it's going to be a bit of a challenge, because even though we're not really going to spend very much time trying to tell you about different ways that you can set those things up, it extends to a lot of the functionality of Starry Night. And some things are different with Preview Suite than they would have been otherwise. For example, when we were looking at those equatorial grids and stuff, The default color that was available for those was red. And red is not a good color to use for your labels on your Sidome dome, because that red against a black background, when it's being projected through a projector, doesn't stand out very well. But if you're looking at an LCD screen or a monitor as you are now, it actually shows up really well. So we don't even need to tell you about that.
Correct. So to kind of give you an idea of how how you can have 15,000 ways of doing the same thing, what we'll do is get ourselves back to our original locations. So of course, if you want to get back to your original location, which button are you most likely to choose? Yes, I could see Scott saying that. It is home. So for me, that's going to move me back to 228 in Philly. You can see that the pre-flight window moves me back to where I was. And home is going to reset you back to all of your original options. So if you make a change to say the color or font of your cardinal points, for example, but you don't save that as one of the default options, then when you go home, all of that goes away. So it's a great way that if you're lost out in space, you don't know where to go, home is your friend, takes you right back. So I think what we're going to do to start off with is moving us around. Let's kind of get to different places on the Earth. And of course, if we were to do so, what would be probably the most straightforward way of moving us from point A on the Earth's surface to point B on the Earth's surface? I'm going to move you guys over here so I can see you. Honestly, yeah, just going ahead and unmute. We're going to be fine for now.
I normally go in locations.
Locations, yeah.
So we've got we have either touching. We can click on Philly itself, which is what I've done there. I'm gonna move you guys back over. Click on Philly. We can click on the hamburger, and you'll notice it's the exact same thing, except this is probably where if you've got multiple ways of doing something, one way is clearly better. If you click on the name, you have a far, far smaller chance of accidentally hitting something you don't want to. If you try to go for that hamburger and you slip, or it's dark and you hit another button, it's probably not great. So clicking on the name, of course, is going to give you your locations drop-down menu. You can view from Philly. We can view from a series of distances. You can see radius times 2, times 4, times 8. We've got some tracking, how we would see the Earth or another body below us. But of course, we're going to go easy now. If we wanted to move to Stonehenge, of course, I click that, view from Philly. There we go. If we wanted to go to Stonehenge from this menu, what would we click next?
View from?
You can view from, absolutely. So now we've got our viewing location window, and we can view from a certain location, the surface of, the center, position, or a stationary location. In this case, we're just going to look at the surface of. And of course, we know that Stonehenge is on the Earth, so we will choose the Earth. And here you can use the map. If you happen to know the latitude and longitude of Stonehenge, you could do so. But the easiest thing, of course, would be to search for Stonehenge itself. So what I'm going to do is type in Stonehenge. Oh, there we go. Stonehenge, England. And you'll notice that in the right column, one of our locations has Stonehenge, England. The second has default panorama. Now, our default panorama is the one that we get when we click on home. And if you look at my home screen right now, that looks to be sort of like a grassy prairie, maybe some hills. Which one of those two, the top or the bottom, is likely to have the actual panorama of Stonehenge?
The default panorama, because the default panorama for Stonehenge is Stonehenge, right? No,
Except in this
wait a
case, it's
second.
telling us that instead of the default panorama that we're familiar with, that the panorama for Stonehenge, England has been placed. So that's a pretty good sign for us. We can click that and then view from selected location. Let's see what happens. Now, of course, anytime you're in preview suite or in pre-flight and you don't want to go through the whole flight, what button do we use to jump to the end of the animation?
Spacebar.
Spacebar, exactly. So that's what I'm going to do. Puts us right into Stonehenge. And of course, it had to move us forward the correct number of hours for that to work. And so they are currently 5 hours ahead of the American East Coast. That puts it there right about 7:30, and we can see the sun there low in the western sky. So we were able to jump from one position to the other on Earth pretty easily. Then when we're there, we have a number of ways to situate ourselves so that our audiences, whether they're online or in the dome, are going to be looking in the direction we want them to look at. So, of course, we're familiar that the bottom of our circle, the bottom of our fisheye, corresponds to the front of the planetarium. And maybe we don't want them facing north. How could we get them facing another direction? More precisely, one of the three additional cardinal directions. So north, south, east, and west. How do we get them pointing precisely at another direction?
Type the key.
Thank you, Karen.
The directional key.
Exactly. It's kind of an easy one. If you want them to look south, you can press the letter S, and that's going to move them south. Sometimes it's really way too simple. But instead of dragging and trying to line it up correctly, this is where sometimes the mouse works the quickest, sometimes the keyboard does. And usually what you're going to get from us in these sessions is what's the fastest way to do something so you can spend more time teaching, more time presenting, less time trying to move around. So S is going to move you towards south. If we wanted to see the setting of the sun, we'll have W to put us due west. And now we can see the sun is above one of the, that's a post, and that's a lintel. Okay, above one of the lintel stones there at Stonehenge. All right.
They call some of those giant stones the sarsens. I think the sarsens are the upright stones as well.
Okay.
And the most famous stone for our point of view is probably the heel stone. And I'm not quite sure why they call it that, but that is the stone, if you're standing at the center of the circle or opposite the heel stone even, you can see the sun rising over the heel stone on June 21st. And nobody was allowed to do that this year. You know, the June 21st sunrise ceremony at Stonehenge is an absolute madhouse any other year. This year they set up a virtual ceremony, and as the case may be, it was raining. So that was probably something that could have been better simulated with a side dome anyways.
And
but,
of course,
that's where the sun rises June 21st every year at Stonehenge.
What does Eric do for us but give us precisely the next step on how we're going to be moving time and space? We're now at July 20th. We see the sun at a specific location at a specific time, but we can move to June 21st and see precisely where the sun's going to be at sunrise. So since we're already at Stonehenge, let's go ahead and do this. Bottom of the two pre-flight and render box lines up there at the top, you see it says July 20th, 2020. Easiest way for us to change the date. Or really, more importantly, how do you change the date? What is the way that you would go about doing that?
Once you select the date, it'll let you just type it in.
Yeah, we can hover over them, and if you were to click on July, you could use your scroll wheel. Of course, it's not going to work for me now. You can use your up and down arrows, the much easier way, to move us month by month. So there we could get June. Now, of course, it just happens that we're precisely a month later. So if you click on the 20th, we go up arrow once to the 21st. Now it's 7:31, which on the summer solstice is really just a kind of an arbitrary time. So we want to see what stone the sun is going to rise behind at sunrise. Do we remember how we can get to sunrise immediately without having to look it up online?
Click on the hamburger.
Okay, let's click on the hamburger. Then what do we do?
Click on sunrise.
Yep, sunrise, 4:52 a.m. Perfect. So
They
we
sound like trick questions, Michael.
see it's once you get past okay. 4:52 a.m. and now we have exactly the sunrise that we're looking for. So the sun is just about to break the horizon and make its way over the rocks of Stonehenge. Is time moving currently?
No.
No, you guys can see that there's no time moving. So we've looked here at the time and date. We've set that correctly. We have our location. We've set that correctly. And now in the center, that second of the 1, 2, and 3 hamburgers. Once we have that, now we can talk about the flow of time. Right now we're stopped. We could see that if we were to start time, we'll hit the play button next, we would run time forward at precisely 1 second per second, which means we'd be here for a very, very long time. Real time is just not so fun when we're trying to have a training. So if I wanted to increase the rate of time flow, what would I do?
Like
Well,
the
Mike,
hamburger.
couldn't you just set the time flow rate to 1 second instead of real time? Wouldn't that be pretty much the same thing?
So that it's moving at 1 second every time I click?
Yeah, if you open up the hamburger window for
Okay.
time flow rate, you could pick seconds there.
Okay.
And what's going to be the rate of time when you play it now? Oh, boy, that's a lot faster. That's actually like 30 times faster.
So we've got that. We're moving quickly.
Mm-hmm.
So if we wanted to go in actual time steps, we have the ability to do that. So we can move forward at 30 seconds or a minute or an hour. In this case, what we're going to do, I'm going to stop this one for just a second because we've only gone forward about 3 minutes. We're going to take time back to 1, so it's flowing exactly the way that it would in the real world. And we're just going to increase that by a step. Let's say 30 or 300 or even 3,000. And we'll see what sort of time flow we can get by with. So this would be 30. So this should be right about 30 seconds. So this is what?
It should be about the same rate as that we were just doing.
And so now you can see right about 5:08, there is a sun rising high in the northeast. And it is precisely in the window that is made by the heel stone. So if you were to click on either north or east and you wanted to bring that more in front of us, now you can pinpoint where that sun location. And then if we want to show just how quickly the day can move forward, instead of 30, let's increase that by 10. Now we're moving 300 times the usual real-time speed. And even there, it's still only about 6 o'clock in the morning, so we can go even faster, about 3,000. And it's at about this rate, 1 to 2,000 times real time, where you really get a fast motion across the sky. Anything less than that, you're either going to want to be zoomed in a little bit, or, and there we can see I stopped it right about 750. Or it was a little earlier. There's a little bit of lag there. It could sit on top of one of the stones. So by utilizing that hamburger menu, we can, of course, change time flow And when we get to some of the more advanced stuff in the next couple of hours, these discrete time steps allow us to move forward, say 1 hour at a time, or 1 day at a time, or the really important one sidereal day or month at a time. And that's going to allow us to have certain views and perspectives from space that we wouldn't have if we were dealing with just days and months and not these unique sidereal ones. So we've got our location, our where, we have our when with our time and date, we have the how fast by how we're going to utilize the time flow. And another thing to keep in mind, if you're in the 300 range, if you're below 1000, you can type in any number from 1 to 999. So right now that's 699 of the times real time. If you move into the thousands, then things get a little different. You're only able to utilize the first digits. So we can go 3 or 4 or 5 or 6 or 7, and we could go really crazy with this. But if you wanted to do 49,952 times real-time speed, Starry Night's not going to allow you to do that. That level of precision is just not going to be there. Although I don't think there's any real difference between 49,252 and 49,000. So keep in mind, when you're on the smaller numbers, you have a lot more leeway into how precise it is. When things are going 30,000 times, just to give you an idea, it's moving really, really fast. Probably too fast for you to do any sort of real teaching, other than look how pretty it is and look how fast it's going. So there's another day, and onward and onward. So keep that in mind. All of those together allow you to go any place on the planet, set the time rate that you would want to be able to move the sky around, and then, of course, to set the time and date so that we can go anywhere into the past or into the future. All right. So any
I'm not sure what David was trying to tell me. I've been responding to him in the text window. I think he was looking at the altitude angle. And the altitude angle of anything when we're looking at a hemispherical planetarium view is the center altitude is going to be pretty much 90 degrees. It's going to be the zenith. And we can play with that a little bit. In fact, we can even limit the maximum field of view a little bit, but there's not much need to do that, because any situation when you want to magnify your field of view and center your view on the Ring Nebula or the Orion Nebula or something like that, once you zoom in, then the altitude that you can see at upper right will be the altitude of whatever that object is.
Yeah. Now,
but when we're magnifying just 1-to-1 and we're looking at the entire hemisphere, then it's impossible for us to change the altitude of the center of our field of view without the horizon getting in the way in one direction or another.
Yeah, and I think I've got exactly what David's issue is. It's one of the unique unique. There's a word for it. It's one of the sort of old-fashioned things in Preview Suite. If you go to File and click on Pre-Flight Preferences, under the General menu, which should be the first one that pops up, you have your fields of view and your default locations. You want that to be 190 degrees with a default field of view of 190. At the bottom, you have your default viewing altitude. And that is, where does your horizon sit? So if you are at 0 from the horizon will cut through the middle of the screen. If you set it to 90, then you should be able to get an altitude of 90 degrees now, because the middle of your screen is going to be exactly the zenith. So this
so
would
I
be
changed the preference, but it's not doing anything on the actual thing. Do I need to press save or something somewhere, or
Just-
how do I?
go on ahead and like just grab the.
Yeah, if you click
light.
on the preview pane like Mike is doing, that will often cause it to wake up.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, okay. Yeah.
And so you'll notice now that you have a consistent horizon rather than before where you may have had a
Right.
bit more of a horizon towards the south or towards the bottom. Sometimes that's like if you had a tilted planetarium or you just didn't want this precise of a zenith view, we would then change that. But setting that to 90 degrees now means that you have the zenith of the sky directly in the center of your field.
Yeah, and
I must have just grabbed the view and changed it. That's why. Okay, thank you.
there have actually been a couple of questions that I'd answered in the text window that pertain in one way or another to preferences. And what we were just looking at was preferences. And a few minutes ago, Mike was describing options and how you save your default options. Preferences are not like options. It's something that we want to be careful about, but preferences in Starry Night are when you make changes to preferences, those changes take effect almost immediately. They should be global, and they are not things that are saved as default or not.
Correct.
You make a change to your preferences, that's going to affect everything until and unless you go back and change it again.
Yeah. And so if you'd like to make
the responsiveness things, Paulette had a question about responsiveness. It works the same way. So philosophically, if you can think of rules of the road type stuff that Starry Night might throw at you, if it has a particular bent, then it's probably being controlled by preferences. And if it's something more specific that you want to either save into a favorite that you're going to use for a special purpose later, or if you want to save it into your default options so that you can have it every time you come into the dome. Those are preferences. Those are options. These are preferences, kind of thing.
Correct. Maggie, go ahead.
Hey, thanks. This is kind of a general preview suite question. So as I've been like working through this, as you guys were chatting, I kind of went ahead to the winter solstice to see the sun set. So I like changed the time and I went to all that. But then when I went back to like the dome part of my screen and I clicked like W to get it to go to the west, it's like not responsive anymore. Is there something that I might have done to like make it not be responsive? Is there something I need to press to get it to align back up?
Good question. If you click anywhere in the pre-flight preview, in your preview, and then click a letter, it should take that.
Oh, now it's working. Maybe it was my my keyboard. Sorry.
It's entirely. I mean, remember this. You know, the dirty little secret is that when you have a program that's like essentially 20 years old, when you built on it, you just run into bugs sometimes, and that's one of them where it's like, okay, an extra click so that it knows precisely, and now you've got that all back. So.
Okay. Thank you. Sorry about that.
Oh no. So that moves us to 250. So we're supposed to have a break, and that is precisely what we'll do. Essentially, the only thing that we're going to do in this case is